moon is a 3-day journey.
The crew is the tip of the iceberg. In Apollo 11, there were 400,000 people underneath that all had to do their job or we weren't away. And I think every crew realized that. It was a team effort of that.
Team effort. That's how everything is done at NASA. When you hear astronauts on the stage giving talks, they always say that there's 2 or 3 or 4 of us up here talking, that there's 300,000 to 400,000 people across the country to help design and build and provide the food that the astronauts eat and every single thing that has to happen. So the first thing about NASA is that we only see the top of the spacecraft. The astronauts are sitting up there in that small capsule. And if we're lucky, we'll see more. There we go. So as Sean said, it was 50 years ago last night that the last spacecraft. I don't know if we should put the lights back on. The last spacecraft that carried humans away from Earth left last night, 50 years ago. This was Apollo 11. It's not Apollo 17 that I showed here. The next talk on the 15th of December will be about Apollo 17 and going on to the moon to live and on to Mars, hopefully. So it's been a long time, 50 years since humans have left the moon to come back to Earth. When Columbus discovered for the Europeans this Western Hemisphere, 50 years later, there were 500,000 Europeans living there. After Apollo, 50 years later, there's nobody living on the moon. We have wasted 2 generations of opportunities to continue to the moon, to explore Mars, and who knows what we would be doing now. It's really hard to predict at all. So this was an opportunity I think that is missed. It's as if Columbus and the first generation of explorers came to this new world, looked around, and then went back to Europe and stayed there. So what we're trying to do now with the Artemis spacecraft and what the Chinese are doing and the Europeans are trying to do is to return to the moon, to see what we can do on the moon, how it can benefit Earth, and how we can move on to Mars. And Sean already introduced us. We wanted to provide a little bit of credentials here about why you might want to listen to us. I prefer to be independent here and out of the way. Yeah, it's only the Earth, it's not the moon. So I've been involved with NASA since I was in college, working on mapping the moon. That first picture there, before the astronauts were even selected. And using the big telescopes, the picture in the middle is in the Galapagos Islands, studying volcanoes on the Earth, because if we want to understand volcanoes on the moon or in Mars or someplace else, we have to understand on this planet. The picture on the right is a meteorite from Mars. It turns out that meteorites fall on Earth that are stones that were produced on Mars. An asteroid would hit the surface of Mars and inject material, and some of it comes to Earth. So in 1981, a colleague and I realized that these stones were from Mars. The bottom middle picture is lava flows. You want to study the Earth, as I say, you have to study lava flows. And the bottom right picture is Krista McCullough, the astronaut, the teacher, the space astronaut. And Krista is there. We were training her. She called me from the Cape the day before the launch to go over the mission she was going to teach. And we have right here somebody else who was going to be, applied to be, a teacher in space.
Thank you, Chuck. I told Dale when he came in that looking back at these things just makes me realize how old I am. And you're older than dirt, you've seen some of this stuff. I have been a space junkie forever. I think I remember in grade school when Sputnik went up. Anybody else here remember? Anybody else old enough to remember Sputnik going up? Yeah. There was suddenly a big interest in math and science. That continued with the Kennedy era, and we'll have a couple clips of President Kennedy and his inspirational talks. So I was fortunate enough to have some really good teachers during that time period who encouraged me to study mathematics and go into education. Eventually then I did get to the point where I have a doctorate in mathematics education, curriculum and instruction. And so then I taught for many years, mostly at Wheeling Park High School, but while I was there, I still was involved with NASA-related things. One summer went to a 2-week summer workshop for teachers at NASA Langley. Another summer spent 2 weeks at Green Bank Radio Astronomy Observatory with radio astronomy things. I did apply to be the teacher in space. Fortunately, was not selected. That was one of those things I'm glad that I didn't win. And then when Father Acker brought the NASA Classroom of the Future and the Center for Education and Technologies to Wheeling Jesuit or Wheeling College at the time, through Senator Byrd's efforts, I was recruited to work there. I was one of the founders of that program. We developed multiple educational software programs there, Astronomy Village for middle school, a BioBlast, which focused on how to have a crew survive on the moon for a long period of time. And then 3 of us started our own software development company, and since then have done software both for NASA and for the U.S. Department of Education. In the interim, when I first started at the CET, I was the manager of the Educator Resource Center, and through that program was able to go to various conferences, and actually I've been to every single NASA facility in the country, and we got kind of VIP tours and got to do things like walk inside the vehicular assembly building and walk underneath the launch pad and so forth. I also still serve on the NASA West Virginia Space Grant Board. I have my magic jacket here to show that. And so I still am involved, even though not quite so much actively.
And do you want to talk about seeing the Apollo 11 launch?
Yes, I had thought that the first video that we were going to see was Apollo 17, and so my notes here are for the Apollo 17 launch. Later we'll show, we'll talk about the Apollo 11 launch. For the Apollo 17 launch, at that time we were living in Florida. Dale knows that. Dale just moved down to Florida at the time. And we stood on the beach. We were just, general public. Stood there a good ways away. We've got another picture later that kind of shows the scene of what it looked like. Even the VIP guests during the shuttle launches, or during the Apollo launches, were 3.5 miles away. You just can't be very close. It was a nighttime launch, Apollo 17 was, which was very dramatic. And as I recall, first you saw the liftoff, then you heard it, and then literally you felt it. You felt the concussion of the force. It was truly amazing. Everyone looking at videos now see the launch, and then they say people walking on the moon, or men walking on the moon. It took more than 3 days to get there. And so that lag time was pins and needles for everyone. Are they going to get there? Are they going to have a problem? Let's see what happens. That mission, as we know, was a success. It was the last mission that was a manned mission. We hope there will be future ones, and I understand that they're supposed to let a woman go, and perhaps a woman or someone of color in the next round. It's interesting that the Apollo era of moonwalks, from Apollo 11 to Apollo 17, was only 3.5 years. And when you think what was accomplished during that time period, it's truly amazing. It was the biggest, most costly effort that was ever done by NASA and probably by the federal government, and it was the most fundamental as far as discoveries occurred. When Commander Jeanne Finstein left the moon, he made a very short speech that ended with a vow that we shall return with peace and hope for all mankind. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
I want to talk about how we got to the idea that we should send people to the moon. And it really started with Jules Verne and his novels about the Earth to the moon in the 1860s. And science fiction has driven almost all the people I know who are scientists, who study the planets, who are engineers, who work at places like Johnson Space Center. So science fiction has been this tremendous driving issue that's caused our imaginations to just explode. To think that we can do all these wonderful things. And so in the last 50, 70 years, we've changed science fiction into science fact. But the space age really began in 1957 in October, when the Soviets surprised everyone on Earth, everybody on Earth except the people in the Soviet space program, by launching a satellite, that orbited around the Earth, unmanned, as we said at the time. Nobody was on it. There were robotic spacecraft that orbited the Earth, and it had a 2-foot wide sphere that circled the Earth, and it did nothing at all except say beep, 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 and it was faint because it was so small, but the booster that launched it into space was quite big. So the booster was bright enough you could see from Earth with your eyeballs and watch it go over. So millions of people all around the world saw that. I saw it. Did anybody else here happen to see it? What are you doing, sleeping? Jesus. Anyways, the Russians had bigger rockets at that time in the United States. The second spacecraft they sent up, which had a dog as a passenger, it was about the size of a small automobile. We had no capability of sending up something that big. And so I, in high school, made a joke that the school newspaper published that the Soviets sent up the Moscow Philharmonic Orchestra, and we sent up a high-fidelity stereophonic tape recorder to get it. Laika was one of 71 dogs the Russians sent into space because we had no idea, either them or us, how human bodies, how animal bodies, how life would function in space. Could you swallow food or in zero gravity? Would it not go down? So the Russians got street dogs that nobody owned and trained them to go into space. And they put them in containers like that. Laika, the first one that was sent up, had 1 day's worth of food and 7 days worth of oxygen. And the spacecraft was in orbit for 3 months. So Laika did not make it. The Russians had a number of other early passengers, living passengers who didn't live, and then they learned to bring them back down. They developed their technology so they could bring them down. And the bottom line here says when Khrushchev came to the United States to visit, no, it's later, actually, came earlier. Khrushchev came to the United States to visit, and he gave John Kennedy a puppy with one of the space dogs in the mom. So to show on top, we can send dogs into space. What's the best we can do? And then the consequences of Sputnik were tremendous. First of all, there was panic across the United States, across Europe. Do the Russians have missiles up there that have bombs on them? Are they going to annihilate all their enemies? We were in the middle of the Cold War then. And so that caused great consternation. Eisenhower is blamed for the United States not being first. We captured von Braun and other German scientists who built the V-2s. The Russians got some, but we got the good ones. And we were ready to launch a spacecraft into orbit. We knew the Russians were going to, the scientists, the engineers wanted us to do it first. And Eisenhower said, no. Right now, if you fly an airplane, you can't fly over another country unless they give you permission. And Eisenhower wanted what's called the open skies policy. That if you were in a satellite, or if a satellite flew over your country, that was okay. You did not have to get permission from the country you launched that. So Eisenhower wanted the Russians to demonstrate that you can fly any place you want. And that was very beneficial, especially for Russia and the United States, who built spy satellites. You could spy what the other country was doing. We sent up, it was October for the first Sputnik. We sent up in January our Explorer 58, the first satellite that we sent in orbit around the Earth. And the Explorer satellite had scientific instruments in it. So the very first, most important, really discovery in space was done by a very small spacecraft that discovered the Van Allen radiation belts indicated in the middle diagram over there. And that's Van Allen and von Braun and the head of the Czech propulsion club in the top picture. And then NASA was created. Eisenhower wanted the American space effort to be led by civilians, not by the military. Even though we were using military rockets, he wanted it to be civilian-led. So NASA was started in '58, and NASA's 70th anniversary was just a couple of years ago. One of the things is, I've got a quote here from somebody at the time: the very survival of our free country may depend in large part on education. Our education was not deemed to be very high quality back then, even though for now, the country was wonderful. So we started homework. We had eliminated homework back in the 30s when the progressives said that you should not have homework. We reinstituted homework in high schools and middle schools. We also started the National Defense Student Loan Program to loan money for people to go to college, become engineers and scientists, and I received one of those loans. I got a degree in astronomy, so I was helping defend our country by borrowing money. My tuition back in 1960 was $250 a semester. Now we got two speeches by John Kennedy where he talked about why we should go to the moon. And if I can find the cursor here, I'll try to click on one. There it is.
Space is open to us now, and our eagerness to share its meaning is not governed by the efforts of others. We go into space because whatever mankind must undertake, free men must fully share. I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. We propose to accelerate the development of the appropriate lunar spacecraft. We propose to develop alternate liquid and solid fuel boosters, much larger than any now being developed, until certain which disappearing. We propose additional funds for other engine development and for unmanned exploration, explorations which are particularly important for one purpose which this nation will never overlook: the survival of the man who first makes this daring flight. But in a very real sense, it will not be one man going to the moon. We make this judgment affirmatively, it will be an entire nation, for all of us must work to put him there.
Yet another MAGA Republican handpicked by Donald Trump lost the key race in a battleground state, this time in Georgia, where Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock won the Senate runoff last night, giving Democrats full control of the chamber without.
Space is open to us now, and our eagerness to share.
Here we try a second speech in 1962. This is a famous speech that he gave at Rice University in Texas. In fact, to save time, I'm just going to quote the critical line, which you may or may not ever see. I don't know. The critical line is we choose to go to the moon in this decade. Oh yeah. Well then, and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And in the past, I was at a university that taught space science and space policy, space history, and we had this quote up on the wall for all the students to see. Thank you. So the idea of going to the moon was what Kennedy proposed after we had had a very short flight, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the astronauts were selected in 1959. NASA started in 58. The first astronauts, the 7 Mercury astronauts, because the first space capsule we sent was called the Mercury. And we wanted to do human exploration, not just robotics. So this is the official picture at the top of the astronauts in their silver uniforms. And the one the astronauts like better is them in front of their jet planes, because they were all fighter pilots. They were all macho fighter pilot guys who would stand up to the PR shots when required. And it really angered them that before the United States sent a single human in space, we sent monkeys. Instead of dogs, we sent monkeys, because they were closer to the physiology of humans. And this was Ham, the first one to go. And the question was, can creatures, can life survive the launch, the stress of the launch, where you have multiple G-forces acting on you? Can you survive living in space where there's very small amounts of gravity and weightlessness? Can you survive the food? It turns out the early food was so bad that John Young, who flew in the next series of missions, he smuggled a ham sandwich on board the space station, on board his rocket, and got in trouble with NASA. And can life forms survive landing? So all these things were tested with monkeys, and then quickly we got onto humans. And the astronauts hated being compared to humans. Sorry. Yes.
I know that you mentioned all Air Force officers. I thought Eisenhower wanted to be civilian instead of military.
No civilians had the training capability. You know, civilians imply jet pilot. Well, there weren't jet pilots like this. We didn't have jet airlines, for example.
Military.
Yeah, and so all the pilots were military. And when I was working at NASA 20 years ago, almost all of them were still military, because they didn't realize they had high-performance aircraft experience. And I said the Air Force, but there was Navy. The first guy in space was the Navy aviator, and then the Air Force and Army. So the Russians got ahead of us, not just with the first unmanned satellite, but sending the first person, Yuri Gagarin, on the right there into space. And that was in '61. And then they sent the first woman in space in 1963. And you know when the United States sent the first woman in space? Sent the first woman in space. Sally Ride, I trained her, 1984. So 63 to 84. We claim to be such an advanced country, but some things we're still painfully slow at doing.
Is Sally Ride still alive?
No, she died about 4 years ago. Yeah. And then the Russians beat us with having a spacecraft that could hold 3 people. That came in '64. The first spacecraft, the first spacewalk they did, going outside of the safety of the capsule and moving around so you could work on the spacecraft. So they got ahead of us in everything back in those early days. And there's the Leonov, the astronaut at the top left. He's the first person to walk in space, always tethered, because it's very hard to control where you go in space. And then that's the small spherical capsules, what they came back to Earth in, the Soviet cosmonauts. They always treated their astronauts like fish in a can. And then Alan Shepard, the first American to go into space in 1961 in May, and he launched in a small rocket that was a direct descendant of the military, the B-2 rockets that we got from Germany. And he went in a suborbital flight. In other words, it went up like this and then came back down. His flight took 15 minutes. To circle the Earth at normal elevations in the spacecraft takes 90 minutes. So you can see this wasn't an orbited Earth. The very first Russian ones were orbits of the Earth. And there's Kennedy and Johnson and Kennedy's wife watching this, because if we failed, it would show that our capitalistic system wasn't as good as the communistic Soviet system. That's what people were saying was the case with the space race. So Alan Shepard survived that flight, and then a little bit later, the next year, John Glenn was the first American to go in an orbital flight. He went 3 orbits all the way around the Earth. And we were catching up with the Soviets, but they kept launching more and more astronauts than us. We had limited capabilities. But I don't know if you remember, in 1962, I pointed to my computer, you can see that in 1962, we had the first space stamp, showing the Mercury capsule that John Glenn had flown in. And then the Mercury, we had 7 flights of those, and they were small containers that the astronauts flew in, a single astronaut. Well, to work in space, you have to have 2 people, you have to do more things, have more skills than just 1 person. And so our second series of spacecraft on the way to training for the moon from Gemini for 2, and we had 10 different missions, and those missions were concerned not with exploring space or looking at the moon or the Earth, but they were concerned with can you operate in space for the length of time you need to go to the moon and back. The Mercury spaceships had really been in space 6 or 7 days maximum amount of time. It takes about twice that number of days, 12 to 15, to go to the moon and back. So the Gemini had long duration missions. They showed the astronauts survived, the spacecraft survived. If you're going to go to the moon the way we ended up doing, the way the Russians tried to do, is you have to have multiple spacecraft come together without colliding, and dock and transfer people, transfer materials. And so Gemini were the first ones to do the rendezvous and docking, and to have the second ones to have astronauts out in space. This was a heady time if you watched any of this on television back then. And then the space race really affected our society. Do you remember cars that had big fins, just like the spacecraft had fins to help them steer when they're in the atmosphere? And the big red taillights, those are like the flames that come out of the bottom of rockets as they go up. So the bottom building on the right is a filling station in Los Angeles. We had the space flare, the future in space. We're all integrated together with the ideas of architects. And you recognize the middle picture, what that's about. It's a 2001 version of the space station, long before we had one. And the 2001 movie came out in 1968. We had been in orbit around the Earth, but we didn't have a space station like the movie did. We didn't have the great capabilities in the movie. So this is science fiction, again, guiding us and inspiring us. And the astronauts immediately became heroes. This is the top picture of the white Corvette. There's Shepard, who was the first man who did that little ballistic flight. General Motors immediately gave him a Corvette. And after that, they tried to give Corvettes to all the original 7 Mercury astronauts. But the government said these are government employees. They can't accept things like that as gifts. And so General Motors provided a Corvette to each astronaut for a zero-cost lease. And John Glenn he was not a sports guy. He was not one of these rugged human guys, even though he had been an Air Force pilot. He used a little West German car like that when the other astronauts were driving Corvettes. And then when he got a chance to get a Corvette, a General Motors vehicle for free, for the $0 lease, he got a station wagon. But the astronauts were great heroes. There were parades everywhere for them. Every astronaut got parades in their hometown and everywhere else. And it turned out, as I think I say down here, in the original 37 married astronauts for the Mercury, the Gemini, and the Apollo program, 30 of them got divorces while they were in the astronaut corps. It was a hard life. They were away from home a lot, and they had groupies. I figured it out. I learned that astronomers don't have groupies. Same time we were training people to go in space and to live in space, we had to learn more about the moon, the target. And so we sent 3 different types of unmanned spacecraft to the moon to study it. And the first one, our technology would not allow us to land or go in orbit. We couldn't do that yet. So we sent essentially a bullet. We sent a spacecraft that had cameras on, and it would go and hit the moon. It couldn't control itself, it couldn't stop. So it was a kamikaze spacecraft. And we launched 6 of them. Every single one of them failed. The last one, number 6, everything worked perfectly except the cameras would not turn on. And then Jet Propulsion Lab, the famous Jet Propulsion Lab, this was one of the early spacecraft, and the manager of the Ranger program was fired at JPL, and they went through 2 reorganizations of JPL to get this right, because if this failed, NASA had no future. So many of the things NASA has done has been survived or not. So the camera took close-up pictures as it got in, and Ranger 7, 8, and 9 were great successes, and I was working at the time at the university measuring the craters that we discovered in all those days. And the guy on the left with the suit is Gerard Kuiper. He was the director of the laboratory I worked in, and he was on national television after Ranger 7 finally worked. And he said these really stirring lines. This has been a great day for America. This is a great day for science. The pictures are not 10 times better than astronomical pictures, which would be phenomenal in itself. They're not 100 times better than the astronomical pictures, which is what the engineers promised us. They are 1,000 times better. There was just a tremendous increase in the understanding we could gain because we have so much higher quality data. And then the next series of spacecraft we had with the lunar orbiters. We had the capability to put a spacecraft in orbit around the moon, no people, and just cameras. And the cameras in the 5 different orbiters took 3,000 pictures. They had 2 cameras side by side. One was a close-up, a high resolution, and the other was wide angle. And the pictures were taken with spy cameras like we use on Earth to spy on the Russians. And then they were scanned. Those images were developed in the spacecraft and then scanned because we didn't have video cameras then. And then the scans were sent down as radio signals to the Earth, and they had created machines that could read the scans and translate them back into dark and light. And so each of those lines on the left over there, there's numbers. That was one scan column. These are the pictures I worked on when I was mapping the moon back then. And then the final one, before humans were sent there, is the surveyor. The surveyors landed, and they were to see is the moon surface really solid enough that we won't go through, that we will be able, the surface will be able to hold up the spacecraft, and astronauts will be able to work. And yes, we were able to do that. The Russians did the same thing, the postage stamp on the right. The Russians got a lander on the moon a few months before we did for the first week. Yeah. But their landers were like their original Sputnik spacecraft. They had very small amounts of science on them. We do chemical analyses of the rocks in the spacecraft and then send the results back to Earth. We could take these high-resolution photographs. I mean, we learned a tremendous amount from each one of these. And then the thing you might be wondering about is, well, how far away is the moon from Earth? How hard is it to get there? And how big?
And Sean at the beginning said this is not like a regular class, that there will be quizzes, and he was wrong. There is a quiz, and actually 2 quizzes. And the first quiz is how big is the moon? I have up here a standard classroom globe, and if Vanna will help me, I have a variety of different balls from my grandkids, and ranging all the way down to a golf ball. So I will ask Chuck Wood to start, well, just start with the biggest one here. And the idea is, if this is the size of the Earth, which one to scale would be the size of the moon? So we'll have people raise hands. We won't embarrass you or call you out or anything. Okay, so Chuck, we have this first one. Any hands? Okay, the next one, soccer ball. Any hands? Next one, we'll play ball. Any hands? We've got a hand there, okay, all right. The next one, we've got a softball. Okay. Next one, we have a tennis ball. And finally, a golf ball. I see a lot of people who didn't raise their hand. Those of you who raised your hand for the softball were correct. Who were the softball people? Okay, so you get a prize, you get a sticker that says the 50th anniversary of the Apollo missions. Okay, all right.
So honestly, raise your hand if you did before.
If you didn't vote at all, see, you didn't even have a chance. So this is about the size of the moon if this is the size of the Earth. So if this is the size of the Earth and this is the size of the moon, where is the moon? How far away? Okay, so this you can get up and if you're not shy, and stand where you think the moon would be. Mary, you're not shy. Stand where you think the moon would be. Okay, let's just go back down this row. So just stand anywhere in this row. Okay, so Mary's there. Okay, who else is not shy? You're not shy. Stand where you think the moon would be if this is the size of it. She's looking farther away. Okay, whoa, whoa. She's getting some exercise there. All right, who else is a brave person? You may revise if you wish. Okay, so she's back a little bit farther. All right, who else is not shy? Mm-hmm. All right, where do you think it would be?
Somewhere here.
All right, but you need to be somewhere in this same row. Yeah. So in between the two, nobody else is going to take a guess. All right, Vanna, we need some help here. I happen to have here just coincidentally a string that is the right length. Okay. All right. So if you want to unroll the string.
Yeah, I'll step aside so you get past.
Whoops, wait.
We can make it as long as we want.
Thank you.
It's really hard to do.
He's lost his processing.
I can see you went up past me. I can yell to that door.
Yeah.
I told you, hallway.
All right. Okay. Very good. So all three of our
Right on.
volunteers, though, should get a prize eventually. Yay. All right. Pam, you're a little bit too far. About 30 feet would be the location if we're using the same scale.
What's the actual mileage?
240,000.
240,000.
Now, we get excited now about the shuttle, and we get excited about the space station. Using the same scale, where's the shuttle? Any volunteers for this? Dale, you want to stand where you think the shuttle would be? Or the space station, they're both approximately the same distance away. Okay, about that far away. Mary, you're another volunteer. The space shuttle, okay. So the moon was back there a little bit.
Back there, so.
Yeah.
I don't think of that close to the moon. What was the length of the moon? What was that one? 30 feet.
30 feet was for the
240,000 miles.
240,000 miles. It's the equivalent of about 30 feet to this scale. Okay. Any other volunteers?
About that close.
About that far. Whoa. Okay.
Stand that far.
Not that far. Okay. Anybody else? You're the closest. It's actually about this far. About a quarter of an inch.
Hi.
Yeah.
So you should be way up.
It should be way up there.
So we're just barely off the earth.
We have more winners,
Still
Chuck.
got one right.
You have more volunteers. Oh, you already have one. All right, John, Dale gets one. All right, thank you.
We're not
And
at
then
3,
finally,
the 30%.
communication satellite. These are in geostationary orbits, so they stay above the same point all the time. So as the Earth rotates, they stay above the same position. Right, Dale thinks right there. Pretty darn close. It's about a yard away.
So they're further out than those big.
They're further out than the shuttle. Yeah. Okay, so exactly.
Communication satellites really want to be out so far that they can see a huge part of the country or the world at the same time.
You can see the shuttle from Earth. You can go online.
If you go to the NASA site,
Yeah.
it tells you what day,
Yeah, you can go online and see.
You're right, this is the space station, the space shuttle used to take us up to the station. You're right. It's retired.
Yeah, okay, but you can see the space station and you can go online and see the schedule.
Space station, cameras, when all the scientific
Yes.
experiments and stuff like that.
Particles, we stay up
The question was, did the space station replace the Apollo missions? Is that what your question is?
50 years ago,
Yeah.
with the 50 years, the space stations.
I'm sure there's somebody here.
And you can see close wise, at least that tells you one thing. I mean, we're not, yes, it's an amazing accomplishment to have a space station up there.
It is gross.
Live up there, but they're going to the moon. Not as much science. Yeah, Dale, you have a question.
Yeah, Katie, if you go online, probably to NASA, they will send you an email.
There you
Your
go.
location, your street address.
That's your stupid email.
Every time you show something like that.
Oh,
Freak.
Yeah, it's the space station.
Space
The shuttle is
Yeah, space station, yeah.
It's not focused, you can see. Light starts on the horizon, just goes over and disappears. See what that is?
Yeah.
But you can see with the naked eye.
Yeah. All right, we are now at 8:00. We started a little late.
Somebody
Um,
talking an awful lot.
Someone did, we've got a question back there.
Okay, so my question is, when it comes to the moon, why when we drive, does it look like it moves, or if we walk, like when we're moving, does it actually
I'm
move?
sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Hold on. So when we are driving, or we are walking, why does it look like the moon is moving? Does it actually move?
It does move, and if you want to come up here just for a minute, you can get another volunteer.
She's gonna get all of those stickers.
Yeah.
If you're the moon, then of course you're much farther away. Okay, you are going around the Earth.
Yeah.
Okay, but you are always facing the Earth. Okay, so go around. You're always facing. You're always facing. So walk around, just always facing.
And then,
So, is there a dark side of the moon? No.
Yes.
There is a far side of the moon, but it's not always dark. Okay? Because the same face is always what we see.
just thinking about it.
Yeah. So yes, it is moving, and it is moving, and its gravitational pull is what makes the tides work, for instance.
That's interesting.
So that's moving. Okay.
Thank you.
The moon does rotate.
Yeah.
It takes 27 and a half days. And you know how long it takes the moon to move around the Earth in a circle?
Same time. I think she deserves another prize. Don't you? You get a NASA meatball sticker. One other slide, and that is this one. And I found this to be fascinating. This is an actual image of the moon crossing the Earth. And it was taken from an observatory satellite that was 1 million miles away. And it clearly, it shows the size about a fourth of the diameter the moon is. So that's, wow, really cool. But what you're looking at now is which side of the moon. It's away from us, so that is the back side of the moon. But obviously, the sun is shining on the Earth here, so the sun is also shining on that side of the moon. So it's not dark. It's not dark. It's just the far side of the moon. So there is no dark side of the moon. Well, darn.
There is no dark side.
Yeah. We have more slides, but we have a full day, another session, so. Yes, more questions, yes.
A while ago, the movie was made about the astronaut live with the Apollo space flight. And during the last part of the movie, Neil Armstrong got contact. So he walked over to the rim of the crater, and he, on his rim of the crater, flipped out that necklace of the dead dog.
Like every week we had 100 or 70.
He lost the daughter.
So that's in the movie you saw?
Talk about that.
I wonder if it's the same.
I guess what he dropped in
Is that true or not?
I don't know. I've gone through that.
Because I would chill yourself out like a day.
A lot of what you see in the movies is, enhanced, yeah.
Neil Armstrong walked around. I don't know if they had enough time to do that.
Well, he would have had enough time. They did some weird things on the moon, and we have some video clips of that for the next session. But
Neil Armstrong?
no, not.
I think he had golf ball.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that we'll show. There was another question back here somewhere. Yeah.
Wasn't a question as much as a comment, because I'm sure most of you know there's a museum in Huntsville, Alabama, that is very worth the visit. That focuses on our space efforts. And I was there a couple of years ago. It was amused. There's a display talking about Kennedy's famous speech at Rice University. And when he says we want to go to the moon because it's hard, he leads up to that with this. I took a picture of it. It says, "Why some say the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well be asked, why climb the highest mountains? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? Remember where the speech was. Why does Rice play Texas?"
Yes.
That was that same 1962.
Yes.
We go to the moon not because it's easy.
Yeah, and that's the, we choose to go to the moon, and that's the second video clip that was on here in the show. But,
of course, in our lifetime, I'm not sure anybody's here who has seen Rice actually beat Texas.
well, but they play, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Pam?
Why did they stop?
They stopped because it was so expensive, and we got bored.
We were also fighting a war in Vietnam.
We also had
And
Vietnam.
NASA wanted to spend the money on the space station. And so they took the money from the moon program where we'd already built the extra rockets. We already built the extra lunar landers, which you'll now find in the museum instead of on the moon. Nixon was an interest.
And actually, I've read that Kennedy wasn't all that interested in space itself, but he wanted to be ahead of the Russians. That was an incentive for him. Yeah. But yeah, the war was going on, which was very expensive, and of course, this program was extremely expensive.
$25 billion for the entire building program. That was in 1960s money, so I think now it'd be about $100 billion. Which is Elon Musk buying Twitter twice.
But if you think about it,
We spend way too much.
Do you have any idea what NASA's annual budget is?
I'm partial to 1%.
Yeah, it's about $18 billion, which is less than what we spend on golf. So we are not throwing money away going into space compared to all the other expenses. That's about $2.5 billion budget. It's a selection. Congress and the president, the people decide how we spend our money. And the companies that build rockets like to spend it on space. They build far more jet aircraft. I wanted to say one more thing.
No, I was just gonna say, Mary, you were the super volunteer, you volunteered more than once. So you get the ultimate prize, which is a set of postcard pictures of the moon, including the one that you see on the screen now. Yes. Now, I have 2 more of those for next week, so just keep that in mind.
Also next week, I have a book called Apollo Expeditions to the Moon, which is a wonderful history of a lot of detail of how we went to there and why or what we discovered. So this will be a door prize next week.
Maybe we'll have a drawing or something.
And yeah, I want to say one more thing about this church, because look at the Earth and look at the Moon. What can you tell me about them that's different other than the sizes?
water.
One has water, which shows up as blue, and then somebody said an atmosphere, which shows up white as clouds. And you can just barely see in there. There's some land right in the middle, and the land usually shows up as brown or dark color. The trees are very dark. The main thing is the Earth is bright, and the Moon, even though the sun is fully shining on it, is dark. The Moon doesn't have the things that make the Earth bright. It doesn't have clouds, which reflect about 90% of the illumination that falls on it. It doesn't have oceans that reflect over 50%. The Moon is just rocks. Most of them are dark, and the Moon only reflects 11% of the light that falls on it from the sun. So the Moon is bare rocks, and it's, as you'll see when we go forward and look at the details, a little bit of the details of the Moon. The Moon is a totally different place from the Earth. In fact, a German astronomer who did the first really important studies of the Moon in the 1830s, he said the Moon, he ended up by saying the Moon is not a second Earth. He was absolutely right. We didn't know for sure then in the 1830s that the Moon had an atmosphere. We didn't know if it had water. But this guy, this German astronomer, from his observations, he thought it didn't have this. Probably didn't have life. If you don't have oxygen, if you don't have an atmosphere, if you don't have water. And so the Moon's a completely different type of world from the Earth. And as we go out in the solar system, we'll see that there are worlds in between. There's nothing at all like the Earth. We cannot escape from the Earth that we're destroying environmentally to someplace else, because there is no other place in our solar system. And on that optimistic note.
Let me just say one other thing, and that is, of course, the Artemis missions have already begun.
I have more on that.
And Artemis, the Orion lander, or the Orion capsule is supposed to come down Sunday at 12:40 in the afternoon, so it should be on TV. You may want to watch that. That, of course, is an unmanned mission, and it is not going to the moon or anything exciting like that. It's just, just in orbit, and but it's the beginning of the next phase of Moon. And back there.
Now I was going to say, what time will this be on TV? So we can watch it.
Will what be on TV?
The thing that you were just talking about, the Artemis.
Oh, the Artemis. the 12:40 Sunday afternoon is when it's supposed to land, so I don't know, other than that.
Land is the wrong word, splashdown.
Splashdown.
Just like the
Yeah.
Apollos, it's parachuting into the ocean. And then boat will
In the Pacific, it'll come down in the Pacific off of San Diego, if I remember correctly.
Do I have pictures of?
Big splash.
There's one right there.
There,
When the spacecraft flew past the moon, it wasn't very
That's what
close.
it means.
When it came back past the moon, coming back towards Earth now, it just released those
That's a good idea.
pictures it just released today. And closer to the moon, higher quality pictures.
Double
So
down.
there's the Artemis spacecraft with the moon and then the distance, that little precipice there. And that's the direction we're going. From the moon to the Earth to the moon, but also the goal was to go to Mars. So those are the topics we'll talk about next week.
and we'll talk about the size and the distance of Mars, so don't cheat and check ahead of time. Yeah.
I have an experience that people might find interesting. I met Neil Armstrong when he was less than a week back from the moon.
Wow.
After they did the kind of stuff they do, and quarantine, get out of quarantine, live out of quarantine. I went up to the Wheeling Airport, got on Allegheny Airlines flight to Lima, Ohio. Picked up my rental car, and drove down to Minneapolis. And was there for Neil Armstrong's homecoming. I thought, interesting thing happened on the way there. The stewards on the flight that I took from Wheeling came and sat next to me. Said, "Do you mind if I sit here?" I said, "Okay." I said, "She's Steve." She said, "Are you going to Toledo? Because that's where the flight ended." I said, "No, I'm getting off at Lima." I said, "Lima?" I said, "I'm going to see Neil Armstrong tonight. A few days back from the moon." And I get that, sure. There's a pickup line we haven't heard yet. So we get around, on final approach at Lima, all down to the terminal, and answer this. She was back interested in Neil.
That's another
Take her over to
thing.
supper.
Russian celebrity.
I did.
Okay, so, anything else?
Yeah, I want to say that the 3 books that I've written about the moon are up here, if you want to take a look at them. Another one, and then here's a nice globe of the moon. So if the moon's the size, that's the same size as the Earth on that globe. So the scale can be anything you want when you make a globe. But you see, the side of the Earth, the moon that faces us, has lava flows over a lot of the surface. And the far side of the moon has almost none. So we'll talk a little bit about why that occurs. And it's a wonderful place. All these white things are names. The moon has about 5,000 names. I'll mention that. And here's I published articles in Sky and Telescope.
We can do it pretty quick.
One of my recent articles.
We've gotten skill.
A lot to learn about the moon.
I don't know if it's a skill that translates
All right.
into money.
Thank you forever.
Thank you.